Welcome to Yin and Young. The following is a story taken from Chapter 2. I have called it, The People is Always Right. I hope you enjoy it. The family eventually broke off as Zhuyu had to prepare for the nightly meetings called Critical of Others and Self-Critical. These were nightly meetings for confession which normally required the attendance of every able-bodied person. Zhuyu went to her room and the others returned to their evening rituals. They did not attend the confessions because Qianlong was in the military, and Wu Wen was too old. Yinlin often came with her mother in the past, but now that her grandmother was here, she could stay at home. "I get to stay with you, Nai-Nai," Yinlin said. "Yes, no need to go to those ridiculous meetings." Yes, ridiculous, Yinlin thought to herself. That is what those meetings are. They made her so tired and bored. Her mother never had to attend the meetings on the base, but at home it happened every night. Zhuyu came out of the bedroom. Her clothing, like everything else at that time, was provided by the government in standard cuts and colors, usually dull green or blue. However, Zhuyu's wardrobe was different from most. She wore clothes that were supplied by the army, and she was one of the few women who wore skirts instead of baggy pants. To brighten up her shirt, one could hardly call it a blouse, Zhuyu sewed her own decorative collar onto the top, giving it an air of femininity that was absent on most women's clothes. Zhuyu threw on her coat and hurried out the door without a parting word. The gathering point was not far. When Zhuyu arrived, others had already organized their materials and were arranging themselves in marching order. As usual, there was some joking and a sense of casual inattentiveness as they raised their flags. Zhuyu noticed that her comrades were brief in their greetings, and she sensed a subtle coolness in their attitudes. She attributed this to the fact that she was arriving late and put no more thought into it. Together they fell into unison and began their march singing, "The East is Red." This was followed with, "China has brought forth a Mao Zedong." They continued their marching while singing various songs and chanting slogans, "Chairman Mao, long, long live," "Protect Chairman Mao with our lives," or "Beat down the four." Again and again, as if for the first time, they repeated with zeal and eagerness these well-worn, revolutionary phrases. After completing the march, it was time to sit for confessions while warming themselves with a cup of tea. They remained outdoors, gathering just in front of the poster board where the news and important notices were displayed. Remaining outside, despite the evening cold, demonstrated their commitment to endure hardship as they submitted to the discipline of self-examination and confession. During confession, each person took a turn to explain in detail the ways in which he failed the revolution, and then followed this with an expression of renewed commitment to do better. Many of the confessions were of the type that indicated a general laziness, or not being carefully attentive to the words of Chairman Mao, or putting family ahead of the people. These were common confessions. They were the sorts of things that Zhuyu would recite without thinking. Sometimes confessions were accompanied with a heroic story of inspiration, and sometimes they took a more serious tone. It occasionally happened, though more and more rarely, that during confession an individual sincerely asked a question such as, "Is the revolution really helping people?" But such a person was either too brave, too honest, or too naive, because the next day he would be put in jail, and no one would hear from that person again. These stories were heard of, but such things never happened in Zhuyu's circle, as each person there was either too careful or too devoted. One by one, each person fulfilled his duty, confessing, attentively listening, and sipping on tea. One of the early confessions was by Comrade Qin Guo, who said he had a wooden Buddha that had been in his family for 3 generations. He had felt the Buddha was too small to be used for firewood, but one day when he looked at the Buddha, he heard the words, "Eating is more important than having," and he realized that while he gets enough food from the government, there are still many people who suffer. He realized that he should stop being selfish and contribute that worthless thing to support the revolution. So he finally swept the demon out of his home and placed it in the community's wood collection for burning. "I do this," he said, "because I want to declare clearly that I have cut with my old ideas, my old habits, and my old family. I am a newborn person, and I understand the superiority of practical living." "Long live Chairman Mao," the group recited, at the conclusion of Comrade Feng's confession. As each one took a turn proceeding around a circle, Zhuyu saw that she would be the final one to speak today. About halfway through, one woman, Comrade Qi Chuntao, recounted to the group an example of Mao Zedong's expectation that women shoulder half the sky. "I want to speak of the Iron Girls," she began. "They have devoted their lives and their bodies to Chairman Mao and to the people," she said. "When I read it on the news board here—" She paused to indicate to everyone where they could read the article for themselves. "I felt it was glorious. Their example makes me want to do better with my life. These women are helping to dig a canal from the Zhujiang River." Zhuyu kept a straight face as she listened. She was well advanced in the final term of her second pregnancy, and while not feeling very comfortable, simply looked ahead blankly, not bothering to glance at the board. She had also heard about these Iron Girls, and it disgusted her. These women were devoted volunteers, yes. They worked in the river digging the mud, but this was northern China, and they continued their work all year, even through the winter where the temperature dropped to -20 degrees. She could not imagine these women with half their bodies soaked in water all day in the summer and at such temperatures in the winter. For Zhuyu this was ridiculous. She did not believe in it at all. But she did not say anything. Comrade Qi continued. Again she gestured to the message board. "These young women love their country so much," she exclaimed. Even taking a few paces toward the board, looking at the poster with adoration, moisture glistening in her eyes, she choked up, turning to the group and with difficulty continued her reverence. "They are young, but they want the people to progress." She laid special emphasis on the word people. "They don't want to be laggard. They have a vision of a day in the future when the water from the Zhujiang River will increase the value of the farmland and ease the life of the villagers." There was silence. Finally, after quietly wiping her tears, the woman continued in a whisper. "So, when I complain in my heart about work and the heavy lifting, I just think of those heroes, these women shouldering half the sky." Again she paused, blinking back the tears. "I am filled with enthusiasm to do my job with all my heart. I will not waste any time with talking or slowness. I will not let my laziness damage the people." At this it was clear that Comrade Qi was finished, and the group replied in unison, Long live Chairman Mao. However, Zhuyu had already stopped listening. After the second time that Comrade Chi pointed to the board, Zhuyu felt she should at least pretend to show interest in the article posted there. She scanned the board to see the article, but as she did so, she saw another poster beside it. The heading of that poster read, "Witness the despicable soul of Zhuyu." Zhuyu froze. Was there someone else named Zhuyu? She didn't think so. The poster had to be speaking about her. As the comrade's duty to confess continued around the circle, Zhuyu looked more carefully at the words on the board, trying to absorb the accusations that were posted there. Clear for everyone to see. Beat down Zhuyu. Zhuyu is Tai Tai. That means an officer's wife. She thinks she can be different from other people. At first she read it as if she were reading any other news story, but as she absorbed the intention behind the words, her skin prickled. Comrade Zhuyu spoke. It was obvious that he was in distress because he had been secretly wiping tears from his eyes for some time. When his turn came, he said he had been selected as part of the requirement that people guilty of worthless thinking needed to be identified. There was a quota that each organization had to fulfill, perhaps 5% of the working population. No one knew for sure, but every company had someone who was identified as having tendencies that people in the West might simply label as imaginative or thoughtful. Such people were labeled as unproductive or selfish. Recently, I have been selected for work camp, Zhuyu began. A few people in the group made quiet sounds of sympathy. It is because I am too selfish and need to be taught the value of work. But I confess that I have had angry thoughts. I felt that I am devoted to Chairman Mao. He paused, his voice coming out in a whisper. But I like to read and write a little at night, before I sleep. The problem is I come to work tired sometimes and not very eager to do the work. But I know I will do better. At the work camp there will be no time to read or to write. I will miss my home here, and these friendly streets. But I am willing to sacrifice for the people. These final words he pinched his eyes together and looked down, no longer able to look at those around him. Again the group replied, "Long live Chairman Mao." Zhuyu hardly heard the previous confession as her turn to speak came closer. She realized that today was not going to be a day where she made her usual confessions. Today was a day for her humiliation. In China, the people is always right. The people is what the Communist Party works for. Chairman Mao is head of the Communist Party, and he's like God. But he works for the people. That means Zhuyu, who thought she was different as others, was being accused of a great sin by elevating herself above the people. Zhuyu didn't know what she should say. Her turn was next. Tears came to her eyes, but she refused them. Something in her got black and angry. She turned and looked again at the poster. She thinks she is the opposite of the people, it read. So she isolates herself from the people. She will not do the same duty as other people. Let's beat her down together. Yes, she was going to get beat down. Today she was going to receive the beating, and the beating was expected to come from her own mouth. As she thought about what to say, Zhuyu felt searing indignation. What is their complaint? Why are they isolating me? She thought. She looked at them in their drab blue and gray hideous outfits. She knew that she stood out, she understood that. But what's wrong with trying to make yourself better, even as the country's getting better? Why can't a person seek more dignity? Zhuyu was not a person with clear thoughts, but she had a clear attitude. She knew she was better than this. She was better than drab gray. She was better than these baggy pants, and she was not going to destroy her body working waist deep in muddy water. Following Chairman Mao and devoting your heart to the people is good. She devoted herself. Hadn't she devoted her entire life to her parents? And now isn't she sacrificing herself to raise her daughter and care for her husband? So who wrote this poster? Such a poster would never go up without agreement from the others. Why did they want to hurt her? She tried to recall. Was there anything that had happened recently? She looked across to Changmeng Yao. She recalled how not long ago his hand seemed to brush against hers as he stopped to talk with her recently. Was he angry that she retracted her hand so visibly? What a man, she thought. Touching a pregnant woman with suggestion in his eyes, it disgusted her. Zhuyu adjusted her body again, uncomfortably, and then recalled something that happened at work earlier in the week. A truck had arrived at their distribution center full with eggs from the country. Unloading this truck was a job for everyone. Even the highest leader came out to transfer the eggs from the truck to the storehouse. Zhuyu as an accountant was no exception, but Zhuyu, in the conditions imposed by her pregnancy, was slow and found it difficult to lift, and she was in no mood to fight for progress. She struggled with each box, finding herself forced to prop the heavy weight on top of her stomach. She walked slower than the others, most of whom also struggled with the boxes. She recalled Comrade Chi's showy enthusiasm. Comrade Chi continually pressed her colleagues with smiles and encouragements to seek the good of the people, or to gain more glory for the country, and today was no exception. She seemed almost to run with the egg boxes, pushing her body to the limit, all the while talking about how good the farmers are to produce so many eggs for the people. Perhaps the beat-down poster came from her hand. It was hard to know, Zhuyu thought. If I work slowly, how could they be angry at me for this? My child might be deformed because of these boxes. Zhuyu became aware of an attentive silence. It was her turn to speak, and the people waited patiently for a word. She looked around at her comrades. She began. But she couldn't find words to speak. She was angry to be judged by these people. As she opened her mouth again to speak, her mind flashed back across the years of her life. She worked so hard, and yet, what did the people do? They wanted to take away what little remained of her dignity. Her sweet memories of childhood had all but disappeared. Her school years had been given over to sleeping by a roadside, collecting chicken shit, and enduring the scorn and abuse of her classmates. When she came home, she had to parent her parents. And now when her life is turning for something better, her own colleagues want to make it ugly. They want her to abuse her body. They prefer that she damage her own child. and since she refused this, they want to beat her down." Tears slipped down her face and dripped from her chin as her mouth hung in an open grimace. They wanted to call her Tai Tai. She looked around at each one of them, hating them. She did nothing to them. She only tried to improve her life, and the people would not allow it. Yes, there were tears, but they were not tears of repentance. They were tears of rage. Her face suffered pain, but it was not the pain of penitence. It was the anger of a child denied the love that was her natural-born right, betrayed one time too many. Zhuyu's colleagues had hoped for a confession, but accepted tears as a replacement. Zhuyu's colleagues had hoped for a confession, but had accepted tears as a replacement. It was night now, and people were ready to retire. As the darkness and cold closed in around them, Zhuyu's tear stains glistened on her face like stars in the black night. Her colleagues uttered "Long live Chairman Mao" one last time. The group dismissed, and Zhuyu disappeared into the night. Yinlin took one last stretch and began changing into her day clothes while still under the blanket. It wasn't easy, but at least she avoided some of the shock of the cold room. She jumped out of bed, ran to the opposite corner of the room where the chamber pot was kept behind a light blue curtain decorated with birds and fish. Coming from there, she went straight to her father's boots. Oftentimes, because her father would go out before breakfast, Yinlin would find a delicious warmth left by his body heat for her morning feet. "Look at your daughter," her mother said as she dished up the food, suppressing a smile. The moment of joy and affection was the first sign of reprieve from a long night of tears and discussion between Zhuyu and her husband. In those days, Qianlong was the hero of the family. He was a soldier, and his wife Zhuyu loved a strong man, a soldier who would take care of them all. As he sat drinking tea at the table, Yinlin snuck glimpses of him and his ruddy cheeks. His eyes smiled back at her. Her mother dropped a bowl of congee on the table. "Yinlin, come eat."